All right, let's get into it. We often think of the first civilizations as kind of simple, almost primitive, but they really weren't. They were these radical, competing experiments in how millions of people could live together for the very first time. So, what's the secret sauce? Is there a single recipe for building a city, a whole society? Well, for thousands of years, humanity's first answer was surprisingly simple. You find a river.
And this is the classic model we all hear about, right? You've got this powerful river that provides water, and crucially, its yearly floods drop off this rich, fertile soil. This lets you grow way more food than you need, a surplus. And that surplus is the spark that lights the fuse for everything else. Suddenly, not everyone has to be a farmer. You get builders, traders, artists, priests. You get a civilization.
Today, we're going to look at three of the first great urban cultures that grew up from this model: Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Indus Valley Civilization. And what you're going to see is that while they all started by a river, they ended up with three totally different blueprints for how to build a world. When we picture the ancient world, it's usually the pyramids of Egypt or the ziggurats of Mesopotamia that come to mind. They're iconic, but the biggest player on the scene, the true heavyweight champion of the Bronze Age, was actually the civilization of the Indus Valley. Just look at the sheer scale we're talking about here on this map. The Indus civilization wasn't just big, it was enormous. It stretched across modern-day Pakistan, Afghanistan, and northwest India. That's an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia put together. So how did this massive difference in scale show up in their cities? Let's dig into how they actually built their worlds, because the physical layout of a city tells you so much about the people who created it. And believe me, the differences here are just staggering. So on one hand, in Mesopotamia, you had cities like that just grew. They were organic, a tangle of winding streets that spread out from a big temple in the center. But the Indus Valley, they did something that looks shockingly modern. Their cities were pre-planned on a massive scale, laid out in this precise grid, almost like a modern city today. And we're not talking about little alleyways. Some of the main streets in a city like Mohenjo-daro were up to 10 meters wide. That's huge. They were straight as an arrow and crossed each other at perfect right angles. This was happening centuries before the Romans got famous for doing the exact same thing. But this is where their blueprint is just mind-blowing. While the Egyptians and Mesopotamians were pouring their genius into building giant temples and tombs for their rulers, the Indus people were focused on public health. They created this incredible city-wide sanitation system. Every single house, rich or poor, had a bathroom and was connected to a covered drain system. This wasn't just about pipes. It was a statement of their values, an amazing focus on the well-being of the whole community. Okay, so who was in charge of all this? You've got this chaotic, organic growth on one side and this meticulous, planned-out order on the other. It makes you wonder what their societies were like, and this is where their blueprint split even more dramatically. Over in Mesopotamia, we have a really clear picture of how things worked, thanks to this amazing artifact, the Code of Hammurabi. It was carved into stone for everyone to see. It was a complete legal code from a powerful king who said his authority came straight from the gods. And the laws were tough, based on that famous eye for an eye principle. Justice was quick, it was clear, and it came straight from the top down, from a divine king. It was a system built on absolute, visible power. Which brings us to this really fascinating question. We know Mesopotamia had powerful kings and Egypt had godlike pharaohs. So who was running the show in the super-organized Indus Valley? Who was coordinating all those grids and drains? Well, this is one of the biggest mysteries in archaeology. After decades of digging, we found pretty much no evidence of kings or queens. No giant palaces, no fancy royal tombs, no huge statues of some ruler. It looks like their power structure was completely different. Maybe it was a council of priests or a group of powerful merchants who focused on public projects instead of their own personal glory. Of course, all civilizations have to end. That's true for every individual person, and it's true for the society as a whole. And here again, their blueprints for how the world works couldn't be more different. Let's start with the individual. Their ideas about the afterlife were shaped by the rivers they lived by. For the Egyptians, the Nile's floods were gentle and predictable, so they imagined a paradise, a perfect version of their life on Earth. But for the Mesopotamians, the Tigris and Euphrates rivers were violent and unpredictable, and so they saw only a dark, gloomy underworld for everyone, a pretty grim, dusty eternity. But what about the end of an entire civilization? The Indus Valley was thriving for over 700 years during its peak. But then, around 1900 BC, a slow, strange decline started. The great cities began to empty out. Now, unlike other ancient empires that ended in some dramatic war, the end of the Indus civilization seems to have been caused by something much quieter, and maybe even scarier. There are no signs of a huge invasion or a massive civil war. Right now, the leading theory is climate change. The summer monsoons, which were the lifeblood of their farming, started to get weaker. This, combined with earthquakes that might have actually shifted the paths of major rivers, was a devastating one-two punch. The very environment that created the civilization slowly fell apart, and their highly organized world just unraveled.
So what do we take away from all this? From these incredible, very different experiments in how to build a civilization, what's the final lesson for us today?
The biggest takeaway for me is that there was never just one right way to do it. There was no single blueprint. Right from the very beginning, humanity was trying out competing ideas. Do you want an all-powerful ruler or a group of decision-makers? Do you focus on the gods or do you focus on public works? These weren't failed attempts at being us. They were just powerful, different answers to the same big questions we still ask. And that leaves us with one last big thought. 4,000 years from now, when archaeologists are digging through our ruins, what story will they tell about us? Will our legacy be our skyscrapers and mansions, the monuments to our most powerful people? Or will it be our public parks, our libraries, our infrastructure, the evidence of how we cared for everyone? What, when it's all said and done, is our civilization's blueprint?